We'll head right into our Seahawks news here with this loss to the Raiders. Tough one, as I mentioned, a tough one in overtime. The Seahawks put up 34 points, as you can see on your screen, 2 interceptions. Couldn't get the job done. November 27th versus the Las Vegas Raiders, a 40-34 loss in overtime. Just a frustrating one. We look over here quickly to our players of the game on offense. I went with DK Metcalf, 11 receptions, 90 yards on 15 targets. Throughout this game, DK was able to get the ball. The 15 targets. I've been clamoring for the guy to get the ball, and he did. It was interesting to see the Seahawks offense kind of go into some, 5-out offense, some quick pass. To stick with that point, though, in the pass part, Seattle looked more pass-heavy in this game, which isn't always the greatest thing. I know Geno Smith's having a really solid year. You've got the offensive weapons that you do in the pass-catching area, but Kenneth Walker III and this run game is what has powered Pete Carroll offenses for about, 13 years now with the Seahawks team. So tough one there, but both Belle and I went with our offensive player of the game in the pass catching region, as she went with Tyler Lockett, 3 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. She really liked the 22.7 average on the receptions there for Tyler Lockett. Both of those good choices here. Just unfortunate that even though the offense put up 34 points in the game, that the team could not come out with the win. I would consider it a relative successful outing for the offense, just considering that, with the 2 interceptions that I mentioned and a bunch of trips, a bunch of possessions, that the offense could have actually scored more, funny enough, whether it be turnovers that were caused, a lost fumble, and getting field goals in the red zone. The Seahawks have one of the worst red zone offenses in the league. That's got to change if you're going to play winning football, period. So, that's something that I want to see change as this season goes on, and that's got to be an urgent factor, considering that you've got divisional opponents like San Francisco now that have overtaken you for the number 1 spot in the NFC West. So we'll look over here to defense. Defense normally wins you championships, and Quandre Diggs was our player of the game, unanimous pick, 6 total tackles, 2 solo tackles, 2 pass deflections, and 2 picks. Both of those interceptions coming in the first quarter. The first play from scrimmage, Derek Carr overthrew a receiver. Quandre Diggs was Johnny on the spot. And then later on in that first quarter, Diggs was able to get an interception off of a tipped ball by tight end Foster Moreau, different Moreau. Diggs had a pretty solid game. He was caught for a touchdown on a wheel route off of Raiders running back Amir Abdullah. But the bottom line and the main story of this game is the Raiders running game and running back Josh Jacobs. Jacobs in a contract year. The Raiders declined his 5th-year option ahead of the start of this 2022 season, and he said he's going to use that as motivation. And if that wasn't evident on Sunday, I don't know what was. 303 total yards, 284 yards on the ground, an 86-yard run to cap the game off and win it in overtime for the Raiders, giving them back-to-back walk-off wins. That's just, you got to give credit where credit is due, but at the same time, the Seahawks defense has to be able to stop the run. That comes first and foremost. We've been talking about this, Bell and I, for weeks now, let alone the success that this defense has seen, this turnaround from the early weeks of the year, but also the fact that, breaking tackles has been something that the opposing offenses have been able to do way too easily, whether it's arm tackles, going for the big hit, not wrapping up, all that. The Seahawks actually used to be leaders in tackles, putting out a video, how to tackle, during their sort of glory years of such. So, that's basis number 1. That should be, go back to basics. That should be step 1. I know Pete Carroll talked about in his weekly show today, wanting to stack the box more, get the DBs involved in those tackles, but that's been an issue, and if you look at the past 2 games for Seattle in terms of who they're allowing to run the ball, the pass game, the week before this past bye week was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, an offense that has been historically bad at running the ball. And then you look at this Raiders team where Josh Jacobs has been one of the best best backs in the league. So very different situations for the opposing offenses, but both teams saw major success running the ball against Seattle. And that's got to change if you look at teams like San Francisco in your division who have got Christian McCaffrey and can run the ball in multiple different facets. A bunch of teams that you're going to look at down the stretch here are going to be able to run the ball, and you got to be able to stop that. That's factor number one. So that was kind of the big takeaway from this game, was being able to stop the run. Seattle just got gashed play after play, possession after possession, and it results in a loss. You sit at 6-5 now, and it's things are going to have to change urgently if you want to be able to deal with the teams in your division like San Francisco that have now overtaken you for the number one spot in the NFC West. So tough one, frustrating loss that, it's always interesting to me after these losses. Pete Carroll says stuff like, being out coached is unacceptable. At the end of the day, that is on you. That is on you as the head coach, as the coaching staff, to be prepared to get your players in the best position to succeed against your opponents. It's not anybody else. It's not on the players necessarily. They could do a little bit more, I guess you could say, but coaching, that's something that, the staff is always going to be able to control. You have to come prepared. So that's seeing quotes like that from Carroll is frustrating. But, I have faith that they're going to be able to turn things around, but it's got to be quick. There's got to be some urgency to it. So we'll look over here towards our sort of injury news and roster moves throughout the week. The inactives list against the Raiders: running back Tony Jones Jr., wide receiver Penny Hart, who you can see pictured, offensive guard Jake Curran. Interesting to see Curran listed as a guard after playing tackle last season. Defensive tackle Miles Adams, safety Tease Tabor, and cornerback Artie Burns. We look at some of our roster moves here for the Seahawks. Wide receiver D. Eskridge was placed on injured reserve with a broken hand on November 26th. And as a corresponding move, wide receiver Laquan Treadwell, recently picked up and put on the practice squad, was called up in an elevation as a corresponding move. So just to briefly touch on that, I've talked about Eskridge and his struggles, not only, these past few weeks, wanting to see him get the ball, get more involved, but I believe even last year when we were doing the show for our Seahawks, trying to get this guy involved. It's been tough. I know that Marquise Goodwin has been a guy that's come in and contributed as a veteran in the third wide receiver spot, but you want to see more from a guy that was drafted out of college as sort of a gimmick guy, a speed guy, a playmaker. Bottom line, a playmaker, and he isn't making plays. That's an issue. That's an issue, whether that's how the coaching staff is coaching him up, whether that's the strength and conditioning team that's trying to get him healthy and keep him healthy, or maybe that's just on Eskridge. Maybe it's a multitude of those factors, but at the end of the day, to this very point, you could have said this about Rashad Penny until his end of the year last season, Eskridge has underperformed. And that's been frustrating, and this will come up when it comes to contract time. Maybe even sooner if the Seahawks want to make that roster spot available for somebody else. Treadwell didn't make any noise in his game against the Raiders, but maybe he makes some noise in the weeks to follow. So keep an update on that. In terms of injuries that were sustained against the Raiders, safety Ryan Neal sustained an elbow injury late into the game. The severity of that is still being determined. That's going to be a big loss if it's anything serious. Neal, in the past few years, when Jamal Adams has gone down with injury or anytime he's been called upon, has stepped in and filled in those shoes damn near perfectly. And something to note, when Neal came out and on that run that Jacobs had, the 86-yarder, the safety that came in, I think it was Josh Jones, actually. The safety that came in to replace Neal missed his angle, took a wrong direction towards the running back. All of a sudden, Josh Jacobs is gone, heading to the end zone, celebrating. The Raiders fans in attendance are happy, and the game is over. So would Neal have made that tackle? Probably. Just hoping for good things there. I initially thought it was a shoulder injury that Neal had sustained, but severity still being determined. So there's some hope there that it doesn't hold him out too long. But that's an issue there, considering you're already down a safety in Jamal Adams. So we'll head over to team-related notes here. Over the past week, on the 22nd, tight end Will Dissly was named the Seahawks nominee for the Art Rooney Sportsmanship Award. The former Husky and current Seahawk was named the nominee for the award, given to an NFL player who best demonstrates the qualities of on-field sportsmanship, including fair play, respect for the game and his opponents, as well as integrity in competition. It's really cool to see Disley earlier in the year get Special Teams Player of the Week for the NFC, be a contributing factor in this trio of tight ends for the Seahawks offense. Just as a former Husky, obviously, but then seeing the contributions he made in his first year before an injury, and just to see him stick with the team, it's been great. It's been great to have Will Dissly around for this Seahawks team. So we'll wrap up here with some NFL league-related news. On the 25th, the NFL had great Thanksgiving ratings. The Cowboys-Giants game was the most-watched NFL regular season game ever, drawing a record 42 million viewers. That was the second of the three games played on Thanksgiving. On the 27th, someone who had some interest in that Cowboys-Giants game, having teased a move to either the Cowboys or the Giants, Odell Beckham Jr. was kicked off of a plane on the 27th. The free agent wide receiver was reportedly in and out of consciousness and refused to put on a seatbelt. In a statement from his lawyer, Beckham Jr.'s was said to have wanted to comply with the putting on of the seatbelt, and his lawyer said that removing him from the plane and deboarding the plane in total was unnecessary. Now, it's an interesting look. The in and out of consciousness part, his lawyer said he just wanted to get some sleep on the plane. All things considered, I want to see how this plays out. I'm not going to take a side on it. If the dude just wanted to take a nap on the plane, I don't see what the issue was. Maybe it's because he is an athlete. I'm going to let that play out. It's an interesting saga. People are quick to say, hey, why is this guy doing this? He's a free agent. I'm going to pump the brakes and see the whole situation in its entirety first. So we'll look ahead to next week for our Seahawks and what's at stake here, considering it's a divisional matchup. So the Seahawks sit at a 6-5 record. They are second in the NFC West now, dethroned from their first in the NFC West spot, and they're in the hunt. They're not in a playoff spot at the moment. They're one of the three teams that are currently looking on the outside in, trying to get back into one of those spots for the postseason. Their next matchup, December 4th, at the LA Rams in SoFi Stadium with a 1:05 p.m. Pacific time start. It's a big game. I know that the Rams have kind of struggled this year following their Super Bowl win in a sort of Super Bowl hangover, so to say, but they're still a dangerous team. There's still a ton of talent on this roster. You can't take anybody in a division lightly ever.